Okay, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar, Roundabout, using Sketchpad to discover and prove circle properties. It will be led by David Kopolka, who is a technology product specialist here at Key Curriculum Press. David, there you go.
All right, thank you. So here's the plan for this webinar. I've got about 8 sketches that we posted on the web, and you were able to download them, and if you haven't already, you can do that anytime during this webinar. And this webinar will be recorded, and those sketches will be made available in the archived version. So here's my plan, and let me give you a little background as to why we're doing this particular session. In looking over some of the archived material that we had from Key, one of the places where we could fill in was some of the mundane kinds of things that geometry teachers deal with, like circles properties, and then various attachments, tangents, chords, secants, and those kinds of things associated with circles. So Karen Greenhouse asked me to put together some sketches, and I submitted them to her, and she liked them, so we thought we'd put that together and have a webinar about this, which I did yesterday. And I'm going to follow along with the same plan. I'm going to go through each sketch, explain what it is, what you can do with this, and then what I'd like the participants to do is make notes of questions, and they can either jot them down or you can post questions, and one of the moderators will keep track of those questions, and if they're pertinent and important at that moment, I can jump in and possibly answer those. But what I'd like to do is go through all the sketches, show you some things about them, and then back up and go back to the various sketches and then answer questions about how did you go about constructing that. For example, people always want to know, how did you get that right angle in there? And we're working with Sketchpad 5, and if you don't have Sketchpad 5, some things are going to be unique to Sketchpad 5 that are not available in 4. So if you're using Sketchpad 4, there are workarounds for some of these, but not all of them. So having said that, I was looking in geometry books, and I pulled out several of these typical sketches that teachers encounter, and this happened to be one of them, and that is that tangent segments to a circle from a point outside the circle, in this case A, are what? So I constructed this circle and radii and then the tangents to the circle and the intersection at A, and then I decided to use a hide show button to show those lengths. And I dynamically can change the lengths by adjusting this particular piece of the circle. And they stay congruent, so you can show the answer. One of the things that I will show you, if you're not familiar with hide show buttons, is how to create these later on during the hour. A request came in to show proof. How would you go about doing proof with Sketchpad? So taking this particular sketch, I'd like to demonstrate a proof as to why triangle ABC, and when I click here, you'll notice the flashing on your screen is that triangle is flashing, and CDA. Now I will tell you that because of the way I constructed it, you may notice that the corresponding pieces here, A should map to C, which it doesn't. A should map to A, so this should in fact say ADC. So if I redid this, I would construct it in such a way that the corresponding pieces would match up. So that's one of the little caveats that you have when you're trying to do a proof and you want to show things correspond, just so you know. So I'm going to click on showing the proof. And what we're given here is that BA and DA. You'll notice that I use what's called hot text, and I'll show you how the hot text is used and created later in the hour. So when I select BA, you'll notice that it lit up over here on my sketch, and DA. So these are tangents to this circle. So I constructed the 2 radii, CV and CD, and I made these perpendicular, since radii are perpendicular to the tangent segment to the circle at the point of tangency. So that's another theorem or postulate depending on your book. Now angle ABC and angle CDA are right angles by definition of the perpendicular. AC is congruent to itself by reflexive property. and it's a hypotenuse by definition. And so triangle ABC is congruent to triangle CDA by hypotenuse leg theorem. So one of the things that I like to use is this kind of a paragraph form of dealing with a proof. So if you have questions about this, jot them down or post them, and we'll come back to this sketch. So I'd like to go through the various sketches, if you don't mind, and then we'll come back and answer questions about how do you construct that, how do you make various features work. If you're not familiar with creating different pages in a document, that's also something that I'll show you. You notice I can scroll down here. And if you're a user of Sketchpad, you likely have seen our pre-done sketches have multiple pages and tabs. And I'll show you how to do that with document options. So here I've got a central angle. And I notice I misspelled angle. The measure of a central angle is equal to the measure of the. And that's essentially what the postulate or conjecture said. So I'll show you the measure of the central angle. That's angle EBC. And the measure of this arc. And it's the arc angle that I'm measuring. So since they are the same, that should give you the conclusion that the measure of this angle is equal to the measure of the. Now this is the case where this might be a new vocabulary term for students. It's called the subtended arc. That's this arc that's formed by these two intersecting sides of the angle. Now one question people often will ask, and I'll come back to it if you have a question, is how do you go about measuring the minor arc versus the major arc? And that's something we'll come back to. That's always an interesting question. So I'll show you how that's done. Okay, moving on. The next sketch is if two chords in a circle are congruent, then they determine two central angles that are, and I've created this little device over here that will allow me to change the size of the angles and then the two chords, but they stay congruent. You'll notice that I've got some hash marks here, and that's unique to Sketchpad 5, these lovely little hash marks. We also have hash marks to designate parallel lines and things like that. So if I show the distances, so these are the measures of the chords, you can see that they're congruent, and when I change them, the sizes change, but the chords stay congruent. Now the angle measures, and the angle measures will change as I move this device, and they stay congruent. So if two chords in a circle are congruent, they determine two central angles that are congruent. The nice thing about a tool like Sketchpad is it's not just one example that I show. It can account for all possible examples and give the students a nice visual of what's happening rather than something static. Okay, moving on to another conjecture is perpendiculars. And I saw this in a textbook that had an archaeology reference where a piece of a plate, let's just say this piece of the plate somebody found, and they wanted to know, so what was the full circumference and diameter of the plate? Well, one way is to determine what the center is. So if the center was actually hidden, what I can do is just construct these two chords, and they're freely moving, and then construct a perpendicular bisector. And the perpendicular bisector of the two chords will always intersect at the center of the circle. So this particular archaeology example had a small slice of this plate, and so by tracing out just the piece that they had and then constructing sectors of two segments, they could determine the center, and then knowing the center, they can create the circle, because these would be all radius points, and then they know the circumference, and the area, and all the details about the plate. So people are answering questions as we go. Thank you, Elizabeth. In the next sketch, this is a case where teachers are always interested in how did I come about getting this particular minor arc, and then the major arc shows up as dashed or dotted. So this is the conjecture. Inscribed angles that intercept the same arc are. So here I've got, these are inscribed angles, angle AFE and angle EGC. They're both intercepting this same arc. So what's true about their angle measure? I can show the arc measurements, and the arc measurement, arc CDE, is this many degrees, and I can show the angle measurements. So the students may be thinking that they are in fact the same measure, but they aren't. The angles are congruent, but this measure does not match the measures of the angles. So what you can do is you can ask, so what's the ratio of them? Well, in Sketchpad version 4 and 5, you can calculate these. So if I take my calculator, and that came under number, and I got the calculator. If I simply click on this measure and divide by this measure, you can see the ratio, very tiny there. And if I click on it, it displays that its ratio is 2, so the answer is 2 to 1. So the angle is half the measure of the arc angle. But the two angles in question are congruent. So Chris is asking a question of how do you find angles? He defines an angle as a corresponding arc length of a unit circle. That's true if you're dealing with a unit circle, but suppose you're not dealing with a unit circle, but a circle of any size. So the arc angle here does not necessarily have to be a unit circle. That's a good place to start. And in using a unit circle, that's a good place to work with trigonometric functions. But I'm using something that's a little more broad than that, and just generalizing that to any circle where I've got a subtended arc that's determined by these two intersecting angles. So if you have questions about this, we'll come back to this especially because I know people ask questions about how do I get this particular arc, get its measure, can I find the measure of the chord, the sector, and things like that? And the answer is yes. Probably the one conjecture that appears in every textbook I've ever used in geometry is that angles inscribed in a semicircle. So here we have two angles inscribed in a semicircle. Probably a pretty traditional kind of construction. The nice thing is that I can adjust these, I can adjust the size of the circle, so I can make a generalization about all of this. So I can measure the angles. There are a couple ways of measuring the angles using Sketchpad. It turns out that they're right angles. Now, one of the nice features in Sketchpad 5 is this pen tool. And if I come over to vertex H and I click and drag out, you'll notice that I get this little arc marking device here. When I release my mouse, it changes into a right angle because that is in fact its measure. And that only happens when in fact you have a right angle. And I can display both. The reason that I didn't include that in the sketch is it gives away the story that the angles here are in fact right angles and therefore congruent. So I don't show that part. How are we doing on questions, Mary? Elizabeth?
It looks
Hi,
like
David, a couple. Okay, well, Chris had said it's true if the vertex is on the center of the circle, but a circle with a larger radius will have a larger arc. So it sounds like there's a, I see, there's two different people. There may be a little confusion about arc length versus arc measure, perhaps. I'm not sure exactly.
Yeah, arc length and arc angle are two different measures.
Yeah, so you might want to show those two differences at a convenient point. It might not be so convenient with this sketch. And
so if I scribe an angle with the pen, how can you undo this, the scribed arc? When you say angle arc, you're talking about this particular critter right here? Best thing to do is just undo that. You can also hide it or delete it.
And David, if you show edit undo instead of Control Z, then everybody can see
Right.
it.
Let me go back. My apologies. So here, I've got that. So under edit, undo, construct that out, that marker. I did a Control Z, which is common to both. I happen to be using a Macintosh, and everything will appear the same, except on some screens you may see your text toolbar at the bottom. Although yesterday some folks said that they could actually move their text toolbar depending on what version of Windows they happen to be running. That wasn't true with everybody. So we'll talk about this text toolbar as well.
And David, one more thing that came up earlier, and I think you might be able to address it now. Let's see. Someone had a question about the correspondence, between, it was in your earlier page about the, between the triangles. You could, I think it might have been in the proof one on the very first page.
The first one?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can come back to that.
Okay. Yeah. So in the proof, the corresponding parts weren't necessarily.
Corresponding parts here. It depends on the order in which you make the construction. So I just threw this together, and I didn't really think about the correspondence when I created it. And then I decided after an inquiry to go ahead and make the proof. So in order to get these pieces to correspond, the order in which you make the construction will determine whether or not the corresponding parts are in the proper order.
You also could just rename the, change the label of the object.
Well, we tried doing that, but the issue we run into is that we tried that yesterday and it just wasn't cooperating very well. So.
Oh, I meant if you actually choose the object, like using the information tool, if you click on the triangle.
Change those labels.
Or if you click on the triangle itself with the information tool, and then click on the triangle CDA there within that information box, I think you can change the label of that to be, ADC or CAD or whatever you need it to be.
Click here.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll change that to be.
If you go to the label above, yeah. Oops, I think we.
Did I mess that up?
Yeah, I think you got off onto the point.
Okay, hang on. So I want to come here. I'm going to change that label, and I want to label that to be.
So
let's see.
ABC
I want it to be ADC.
Yeah. Now, it would be ideal if you put in the little triangle symbol, but I'm not sure how to find that on your keyboard since I'm not sitting there.
Yeah, I think we have the right idea, but getting the triangle character.
Yeah, if you type in ADC here, I think it will change the label of the triangle. But yeah, I don't have the code for the right.
Well, it changed. Oh, it did. Look at that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, David just learned something that I didn't know. So now, will it change all of these? Yeah, it looks okay. All right, that's a little better. I'm not going to mess around with all these correspondences and change all those. So, all right, thank you. Any other questions before we move on?
Yeah, there are a few questions. This is Mary. Alan is wondering how you got that call-out information box in the first place.
Oh, this, the information box here?
Yes.
This tool is new in Sketchpad 5, and it allows you to take a look at how the various pieces were constructed. So that's unique to Sketchpad 5, this little balloon bubble.
Okay. Okay, thanks, David.
Yep. In earlier versions, you had to select the object and then go under properties and find the parents and the children and all those things. Thanks for the question. Mary wants to know how to make the hash marks for parallel lines. Can we save that for a few minutes, or do you want me to just jump in and do it? Mary?
Sure.
Mary says sure. Thanks, Mary. Okay, we did that guy. And we did that one. All right, so here's a nice one that allows you, I'll show you some of the things about Sketchpad's hot text. So here I've got a triangle that's inscribed in this circle. And so triangle EAF is, now what I want to do is describe this, and filling in the blank is often a mystery, but this is exactly the quote from a textbook, is triangle EAF is something since EA is congruent to AF. So if two sides of a triangle are congruent, that's what you have to decide on. What's missing? Well, the answer is that this triangle is at least isosceles. Now, how do you go about writing something about that? This is the part that I like about working with Sketchpad with students, is if a student is working on this, okay, created a dialog box, and I want you to write out your conjecture as to how you know this is isosceles. And you can use this idea of hot text. Once a text box is made in Sketchpad 5, you can click on it, but this region has to be filled in. And you can fill in the region in Sketchpad 4, but with 5 we have this polygon tool. And when you select that, what you can do is then select the polygon tool, fill this in, and then of course you can change the color. So let me go back to my text box. So when I click on this triangle, it launches it into the dialog box. So triangle EAF is isosceles because, well, it's these two sides. So if I click on this particular side, and then using my text box, if I select it, I have all these other options from which to draw or choose, and that may have been where we were looking for the triangle, but it worked okay. It's congruent, and that'll launch that here. It's congruent to the other segment. And there you go. And if you want to change the size of this, you can do that in the text box. To increase its size, you can change its color, and so on.
Does anyone have any questions about what David just did? Looks like he did a pretty good job of explaining it. No questions. Oh, here's one. Are the conjecture boxes only available in version 5?
The text boxes, no. You can use any. The text box is available in 4, I believe 3, but it's not going to be a hot text. So when I click here, you'll notice that it flashes. And when I click here, it gets highlighted. So you could still do this in version 4. You just won't get the hot text link.
And just want to point out that if you have any measurements that you add into hot text, they will change dynamically just as they do regularly on the screen.
Yeah, so if I selected these two sides, for example, and I want to measure them, I can find their lengths. And since they'll change here, if in fact I put them in the hot text, let me see if I can add those. Let's just launch them in there. Let's see. I'm just going to type the equal sign from the keyboard. And then if I change these measures by changing that, there. So as I think it was Elizabeth pointed out, the hot text changes as the sketch changed. Everything is linked dynamically. Okay. Mary wants to know if you can select a default color. That I'm not sure of. Can you select a default color, Elizabeth? You aware of that? I usually wind up changing the colors after the fact.
Yeah, you can. I think if you go to Preferences, you can set a lot of those things. The colors kind of rotate through, but you can set up your preferences for your lines and your points, and then they'll
right. It's the polygon part that I wasn't aware of.
Yeah, I think if you go to Preferences, you can. I think you will be able to.
Well, something for people to explore. Unless you want me to go do there. I have one last page, and this is one of my favorite sketches, and it's available. You have it in a handout. This is the result. What I'm going to do is create a new page and show this. Elizabeth, can you tell me, do you see the GoToMeeting control panel on your screen? Is that what you're seeing?
I see my GoToMeeting control panel, but I don't see yours.
Okay, because I'm not using all of the screen because I'm looking at.
Yeah, it's chopping off a little bit of your sketch, so I can't see the full table. Whoops. So the circumference part, there we go. If you can scoot that over, perfect.
So in the handout, it talks about this particular sketch, and I'm going to construct this sketch on the next page. So it just demonstrates the relationship between the circumference and the diameter, and it's a nice teaching tool. So I'm going to reconstruct that and show you what I've got here. So I started with a diameter, created the circle, I measured the diameter and circumference, and then I captured some various measurements in this tabulate box, which is also available in Sketchpad 4, and collected this data and then plotted it, and then I constructed array using a couple of the points here, and then I went back and added this particular movable point K. So I'm going to go through, and if you've done this sketch before, bear with me. If you haven't seen it before, people tend to like this particular sketch. And what I like here about this is it gives kids a dynamic visualization of pi, the relationship between the circumference and the diameter. So the backstory to this, teachers typically have students bring to class or have a collection of cylinders in their classroom. Pringles cans, soup cans, tuna fish cans, circular cylinder cans, and they measure with string the circumference and the diameter. And then they collect that data and graph it, and all the data will be plotted as positive ordered pairs, thus residing in the first quadrant. So it's a nice thing to do by hand, and then redo that in Sketchpad, or you can actually plot their data in Sketchpad. So I'm going to show you how to create a new page, and I'll go through and construct this particular sketch. When you have Sketchpad open, whether you have pages created or not, in order to add a page, you go to File, and the choice is Document Options, also available in Sketchpad 4. You get a dialog box, and you'll see the list of all the previous pages that I have. And this is a place where you can give yourself a page name. The default is that they would be numbered 1, 2, 3, and so on. And you can add a page, remove a page, you can change the page name. I'm going to add a page. And you have the choice of duplicating previous pages. This is handy if you want to use the same sketch in a different class period and keep the results from a previous class period to pick up the next day if you didn't complete things. I want to create a blank page. And the default is that it's page number 9. And now you see I have a blank page, page number 9. I'm going to leave it called page number 9 and go through and do this particular sketch. And again, there's a handout that we provided for you that has this entire sketch. I'm going to start with a segment. and the segment will be my diameter. And once you leave it, you'll notice that it's still selected, and Sketchpad says, all right, do you want to do something with this? Yes, I'm going to construct a midpoint. And now just the midpoint is selected. So do you want to do something with the midpoint? Yes, I'm going to use that as the center of my circle, and then select the other end, and then construct my circle by center and point. I prefer to have students construct their circles this way rather than trying to do it free-handedly, because it's too easy to miss that point and things wouldn't be necessarily connected. Now I want to measure these. Students will try to measure both of them, because sometimes you can measure linear objects, and if you try to measure these, you'll see it's all grayed out. That's because you're trying to measure two different types of objects. I can measure the length here, and then the circumference. Also the radius, the equation, and so on. So those were all some possibilities. Let me go back and show you. I can find the equation, the radius, the area, the circumference. Now what I want to do is collect this data. You'll notice as I move the circle, the data changes. So I'm going to collect some of this data. In order to do that, I select my diameter measure, the circumference measure, and I come over to number, and I have this command called tabulate. I think that's under measure in version 4. So I'm going to slide that over to the right. And what I do now is to double-click anywhere inside this box, and it collected that particular measure, and the next line is a gray line waiting for another measure to collect. So if I adjust the size of my circle, my diameter and circumference measures will change, and I double-click, and I've captured that measure. And the handout says, let's capture 4 or 5 of these particular measures, and it's as easy as that. So I have sufficient measures. Make sure I deselect things. Now, with the table selected, I can go ahead and graph the table of data. Now, you'll notice that I don't have a Cartesian coordinate system available, but if I select that, I will get one in a moment. It allows me to decide, do I want to plot that as diameter circumference or circumference diameter? Do I want a rectangular polar? And I have these choices, because I can change my x to be circumference if I chose to do that. Suppose I selected them in a different order. I'm going to OK that. You notice the coordinate grid is there, and I have my collection of points. And they appear to be linear. Now you can lay a line over top of that, some movable line if you want, and see if you can get a nice fit. Sometimes that's nice to do if you're just doing an eyeball line of fit. For this particular exercise, these points all lie in a ray, and before I put the ray on there, I'm going to add one more point that I can move. These points are all static. They're not going to change. If I change the circle, the only thing that's changing is the last point that I can capture. So I'm going to select my diameter and my circumference. I'm going to come over to graph, and I can plot those as an ordered pair. So I'm plotting this relationship of circumference to diameter as an ordered pair. And there it is. It's point M. Now I'm going to select point M, and I'm going to change it to be a different color. I'm going to change it to, say, blue. And I can see it. And I can see that it'll go all the way down to the origin if I can make this circle ever so tiny. And then another thing that people like to see, and I'll point that out now, is if I select this particular point, I can display a trace of that plotted point. So I went up to display, let me select it, and I trace the plotted point. If I click now, it'll undo the tracing. So it'll leave a trail, and depending on the speed at which I change my circle, you'll see it'll leave a trail. Sketchpad also allows these traces to fade over time through a different preferences box, and I can erase those traces, which I'm going to do now. So the last thing about this sketch, well, the next thing I want to do about this sketch is I want to select the origin and pick one of the points, and by doing that, I'm going to construct a ray. So all the points lie on this particular ray, as does my movable point M. And I want to measure, so I've selected the ray now, I want to measure its slope. So what does this tell students? Hopefully I would like them to understand that as I change my circle dynamically, you'll see point M is moving. As I move along the x-axis, the y part here happens to be my circumference, and the circumference is increasing at this rate, 3.14, times as fast as the diameter is changing, thus the slope. That's what it's telling me. So it might be nice to have the x-coordinate plotted here and the y-coordinate plotted here, and you can see a race between the two. It's something that I think I might add to this sketch as an extension in the future, is to plot the abscissa here. So I would plot x 0 and then y 0, the ordinate in 0, and watch that race happen so they're sliding along there, something I'm going to add. So there are some questions about this. Elizabeth seems to be answering the questions.
Oh, actually, I kind of misanswered a question, and Margaret kind of saved me there because I misunderstood it. Yeah, Mary asked, how did you get M? And I thought she meant how did you get the slope, but she meant how did you get the point. So maybe you could show, that's a really, really nice feature of Sketchpad, the plot is XY, so maybe you could just show that again. Okay,
so let me erase a couple things so you can see that, and that'll be easier to see. I'm going to erase those traces. I'm going to so what I did in order to get this movable point, and I'm going to delete that, so I'm just going to get rid of that guy right now. I'm going to cut it. In order to get that movable point, and it's really a nice feature if you're doing something with calculus, like plotting the slope of a tangent line, you simply select, make sure nothing else is selected, the two coordinates that you're going to be using as xy, the diameter measure and the circumference measure. And you go over to graph, and I'm plotting these as a relationship. So as the x and the y change, now it appears there, and now it's called O. You'll notice that it dynamically moves as my circle changes size. That's a nice feature. And if you want to see the traces, you select that point and go up to display, and then you can trace the plotted point.
Hey David, it's Mary again. I want to interject for a second and let you know we're getting close to 4:40, which means we have about 10 more minutes for presenting, and then the final 10 minutes for questions.
Sure. I think I'm done with that part. So let me move on to an earlier question, was how to make the tick marks on parallel lines. Is that okay?
Yeah.
That's good, yeah.
All right, I'm going to add a new page. Just so I have a clean screen here. So we'll make a line, and in order to make sure I've got a parallel line, I'll take a point not on the line, and then I select my point in my line, and I'll construct a parallel. Now, you can test the idea of parallel, even though we constructed it by measuring slopes. And of course, you'll get the coordinate grid, which you can hide. But there you go. So those are parallel. In order to get the parallel mark, what you do is you use the pen tool. This is only available in 5, and you select. Well, right now it's defaulted. So let me show you what happens when I do that. The last time I used it was with parallel lines. So if I right-click on this, so I can get this to work. All right. I think I've got to be there. Let me hold down the... All right, help me out. Elizabeth is got... Shouldn't I be on the pen and select that? Do I need to go to Preferences? Or I thought it was a right-click.
Oh, I'm not sure what you're trying to do, David. Sorry.
Well, what I want to show them is you can change this from the hash mark to the dash.
Oh, I'm wondering if the hash mark is only available when you have segments, since you have lines maybe. You don't have that available.
It shouldn't matter what I'm on. So if I go here, what's going to happen here is, see, it's going to show that same mark, and I thought it was a right-click, or it's under, let me see. Let me look under Preferences. There's a place, and I did it earlier today, so bear with me.
Sorry, I can't help out with that. I don't know.
I thought I worked on this earlier. Anyway, it should be able to change this into just a hash mark to show things are congruent. So my apologies that something on my keyboard is misbehaving, because I thought I had to do a right click, and the right click on this mouse isn't doing it, or it was an option click. Control click.
We're getting a few. There we go. We have a few comments that the right click worked for them.
Okay, so if I do the control click, now I can get the crossbar. So it's a control click for me. And I can get the arrows. And I can change them to hollow arrows, solid arrows. So on my keyboard, I can get that guy too if I want. Well, that just shows you that the pen can also do some strange things like this. And you can move that around. So you can make funny notes on your screen. Okay, so other questions? We have time for questions?
Mary asked a question.
Going back to any of the previous sketches?
Mary just asked how you were able to bring up the menu that you just brought up with the solid arrow.
Okay, so what I did is with the pen tool selected and this selected, I pressed the control and then my mouse. And with some of the computers, it was a right click, but I'm using a Macintosh with a remote mouse. So a control click and maybe a command click, something like that. So you have to have the pen tool selected and then something drawn there, and then I just like that. Yeah. It's still all the right-click things, because I'm a Macintosh guy, and we don't typically live in the left-click, right-click world.
Yeah, I think control click is the same as right click.
Yeah, control click. That's what I was using. I knew it would. That was it.
Yeah, so we have a question from Kali about what's the best way to bring proof into the sketches. So that's, that's a good question. You want to talk about maybe how you would work from a sketch toward proof?
Well, it depends on whether the particular sketch lends itself toward a proof that would be within the ability of the student. I would start with something fairly simple, so the students were able to do proof with a paragraph. I'm not a fan of two-column proofs. I like things to flow a little more naturally that way, but you could probably set it up to do a two-column proof. But come up with something that you typically would have students prove that's within their grasp, and see if Sketchpad lends itself to that. This is, it all depends. The answer is, so what are you trying to accomplish? What kind of proofs are you using in your books? Those kinds of things. There's no real pat answer for how do you go about doing proof with Sketchpad. Maybe somebody else might have a better answer than me.
Yeah, we just mentioned that earlier when you were showing the hot text and showing, I think you had an isosceles triangle constructed in a circle. And that's a really nice kind of beginning proof.
Yeah.
And if you have an interactive whiteboard in your classroom, you can have students, actually write that explanation. That explanation is a short proof, and then it's a kind of an interactive explanation too, because you have the hot text, so they can actually present their findings to the class. Oh, yeah, we got a few more questions.
Hide show.
Yeah.
So let me take care of that. So I have, that's a very simple little device. So you select something that you want to hide and show. So these were the measures of the sides. Let's just suppose I wanted to create those. There are a couple ways of doing this. Under Edit, Action buttons, you go there, and this is available in Sketchpad 4 as well as 5. Hide show. And you'll get a box. You can move the box around. And it'll say hide distance measurements. That's the default, and it's simply a toggle switch. If you want to change these, what you do is you use the text tool. You come over and you simply, once the text tool is selected, double click, and you can change this label. So you can say hide side measures, whatever you'd like, and it'll change that automatically. And you can change the size of the different things. Other questions? Are you going to do training sessions for upper level math topics in the near future? That's a good question.
I'm sure we will be. Yeah, we have to start planning our webinars for next year, and I will absolutely keep that in mind. There were a couple of nice comments earlier, David, about, Sketchpad does help students justify intuitive ideas, so they can, if they have a conjecture, they can test it out with, hundreds and thousands of cases and justify their conjectures that way.
Yeah, somebody pointed out, and I want to bring this up, the various ways that you can measure angles. Oh, I didn't want that one. So with this pen tool, what you do is you just click on a vertex and drag out, and now I've got this measure. Typically in Sketchpad, you would select the 3 vertices, and this will give me the measure of angle E. But if you use the pen tool and you've selected that part of the angle, all I have to do is click, and it changed color just so slightly, and I can measure the angle now. I've got too much selected here. I've got this guy selected. And I can measure that angle. So there are multiple ways now, and I can measure both of the other angles at the same time. It'll measure angles. And someone mentioned earlier I can show the sum of the measures of the angles of the triangle is 180. So I can click on that angle measure plus that angle measure plus, and I get a running total. Angle measure, and there's my 180. And regardless of the change in the angles, the sum stays 180.
And there have been a few more questions. They're running in so fast, I think I'm losing some of them. Sorry about that. One question is, can you use hot text in the labels for hide show boxes? And I believe the answer is no, but you can actually include a button as hot text, and then the text becomes the button, which is kind of nifty. And you can, I don't know if you want to address that one, David, but another question you might want to address is measuring minor versus major arcs. Right.
Thank you. I forgot about that. So let me come back to where I had This guy. So in starting with a circle, and then I'm going to put some points on the circle. And if I select, bear with me because what I want to do is construct the arc through these 3 points. So that's pretty quick. So you see what I did? I made a circle, I put 3 points on the circle, and I went up to construct. And the default is to get the minor arc, but I can also get the major arc, and then I can do things like, all I have to do is select the arc. So right now I'm selecting the whole circle. If I click a second time, I'm selecting the minor arc. And then I can measure the arc angle and the arc length. Now in Sketchpad 5, the default is that the rest of the arc is going to be dashed, so you can easily distinguish one piece from the other. Other questions?
See, David, and if you drag around one of your defining points, then it'll kind of flip the, if you drag around one of the middle ones, I think the K, if you drag K outside of L, then now you flipped it to the major arc. Maybe you showed that and I missed it.
No, I didn't. So that will give you the major arc.
I was thinking if we don't have any other specific questions, I know that we have some folks who are new to Sketchpad 5, and I was wondering if you could do a quick show of the Learning Center and some of the activities and tutorials.
Thank you. So under Help, Sketchpad has an extremely robust help system. Comes with videos, using Sketchpad, teaching with Sketchpad, objects, tools. So I'm using Sketchpad, for example, will give you some getting started tutorials, some tips. Students tend to like these a lot, these particular tips, and that gives you these bubble sheets, talks about custom tools, which will have a video as well as a tip sheet. Looks like this.
And we had someone specifically mentioning middle school, so maybe if you show the activities, I don't know if I hope your browser didn't just crash. If we show, I was going to say we could show the activities and show what comes with Sketchpad 5, because there's, I think, 4.
All right, where would you like me to go?
Go back to the Learning Center.
I'm in the Learning Center.
I'm not seeing, yeah, and just open it up using Sketchpad.
Is it in using Sketchpad?
Yeah, it might be in teaching with Sketchpad actually, but we can. So in the left corner, sample activities under teaching with Sketchpad. So down to the next area. 2 more down, sample activities. There we go. If you click there, and in the middle grades, these are activities that come with Sketchpad, and they include the sketch. If there's a pre-made sketch, they include the worksheets and teacher notes. And I think about 40 activities actually just come with Sketchpad 5. Good variety from 3rd grade up through calculus, so you can get started right away. Just wanted to show that because we had a specific comment about middle school. Okay. And yeah, sorry, Jason. The what we're showing right now, the Learning Center, is a Sketchpad 5 feature. The Learning Center.
You may want to talk to him about the repository of sketches that are available to everyone.
Yeah, we do have curriculum modules, and Sketchpad Lesson Link both have activities for Sketchpad 4. So that would be something you can find on our website. So those are available. But in terms of the built-in activities in the Learning Center, those are only in Sketchpad 5. Okay, and if you order version 5, yeah, the help system is actually built in. You can order a print manual if you need one, but the help system is completely built into Sketchpad. So I know some people prefer print. I tend to be that way, but the help system is pretty good. You can search for any terms you want and find them that way, and that's usually what I do. Is I search for the command I'm looking for and find the information that way. And other questions? Because we're going to be wrapping up in a few minutes. And Jenny asked, does DSP5 do 3D? There are custom tools that allow you to do three-dimensional. So if you, oh, wow, look at all the custom tools that David has. That's incredible.
Yeah, David has a few custom tools at his disposal.
Yeah. So, for example, the Poincaré disk model, I'm guessing that has some three-dimensionality to it. Yeah. So you can do 3D, but you have to use sort of special tools that have been designed for that use. Custom tools. Yeah, we can share that in a webinar. That's a good idea.
Can you graph inequalities?
Again, I think you'd need to use a custom toolkit. So I think, yeah, I'm hearing the need for a custom tools webinar, and I am writing that down. So thank you for that. It's helpful. And also, if you'll please do the evaluation when the webinar ends, it will ask you comments. And if you say, I would love a webinar on custom tools or 3D tools, that kind of thing, that lets us know and it helps us in our planning.
I'm sorry. There's a question, when is version 6 coming? We don't have currently any plans to build a version 6. However, we do have Sketchpad Explorer for the iPad, which is actually free to download through October 31st, and it has some pretty cool tools that you can't use on the regular version of Sketchpad, including multi-touch capabilities, so you can have multiple students dragging at the same time. It's pretty fantastic.
I'm just going to comment that if you haven't looked at the archived webinars for Sketchpad, there may be some things there that might be of interest to you, and you can play those and pause them, fast forward them, do whatever you'd like. There's some nice webinars on all software products, Sketchpad, Tinkerplots, and Fathom. And if you haven't seen Tinkerplots version 2, you're in for a big surprise for those of you that teach elementary and middle school. It's quite robust. I also want to mention the online courses. If you're interested in taking an online course, I would suggest you go there. Anything else?
Oh, archived webinars, www.keypress.com/webinars. On the side, it'll say archived.
That is a good segue to remind everyone that you'll be receiving 2 separate emails, one with your certificate of attendance, which is good for an hour of professional development credit. You'll also be receiving an email pointing you to this webinar in the archives, and that will have posted the activities from today as well as a recording of today's webinar, so you can watch it again.
So I'm displaying on my screen the archived webinars for Sketchpad, and you'll see there are quite a few from which to choose.
Mm-hmm. I see it's 5 o'clock, so we should be ending now. David, do you have any further comments, or Elizabeth?
No, thanks, David, for a great presentation.
Well, thank you for your support. It's always great to have the the backup singer's doing.
Okay, everyone, thanks. I'm going to close things out. Thank you so much for attending today. Bye.